Hi, we're the Diva Docs. We've got Dr. Tina.
Hello.
We've got Dr. Emma.
Hi.
Me, Elisa O'Keefe-Smith, MBA doctoral candidate, and our very special guest. And you've all probably met him before because we had him on our first season, and that is my buddy, my friend, Range Da Messenga, a hip hop guy, MC, and social activist, and just phenomenal all-round guy. Hey, Range, how are you?
Doing well. How are you? Hello.
So today, what we wanted to talk about is Black Lives Matter. And it's such an important subject, it's such an important topic, and I wanted to talk about it. We did address it in another season, but with so much going on in the last month or so, it was a very relevant topic to talk about once again. So I'm going to turn it over to you first off, Range. And what are your thoughts about the recent developments with regards to Black Lives Matter and the whole racial tension in America?
I think first of all that I would have to establish that Black Lives Matter is like an official movement. And I don't speak for the official movement.
Right.
I speak for just the thought.
Right.
The general thought that Black Lives Matter. I think it's very important.
Absolutely.
And I think it's very important because we're at a time where information is really at a premium. And so there's a lot of information that's out. I know a lot of times I do a lot of posting and I do it in my music. And the more that I seem to put things out, the more I come into the knowledge that there are certain people, a lot of people, both black and white, that are just unaware of the facts and unaware of what goes on. So Black Lives Matter becomes very important just to put out the awareness. I know there are a lot of people, associates of mine that have been white, that when I first started, would say things like, oh, it's not that bad, or it's not this, that, or the other. But as I started to give them information, the ones who weren't racist, I guess, and just were uninformed, you could see them start to change their mind because we live in such a social divide. We live so segregated in our experiences. So it's very important just at the basis of getting out information. When you see that Black Lives Matter, it makes you feel a certain kind of way. And if it makes you feel negatively, then it's like you kind of have to examine that.
Yeah,
why do I feel so negative? I saw somebody who had put up a post that said, if you don't get offended when you see Blue Lives Matter, but you get offended when you see Black Lives Matter, that the operative word is black.
Right.
So it's definitely
Do you think it's a lack of information?
I do.
Or misinformation?
I think it's both. I think it's a lack of information. I think it's misinformation. We're all conditioned. We're all conditioned. So in our conditioning, if you were conditioned to think, well, black people are lazy, or if you were conditioned to think, well, they just want a handout, it kind of starts in our school system because the school system doesn't teach the correct history, know. So they don't teach about how detrimental slavery was and how slavery never really ended. How slavery turned into the Jim Crow, know, and Jim Crow was pushed another 100 years, and then when you had the movements, you had COINTELPRO that was really at the mastermind behind taking apart the movements and the leadership. And so it's kind of like all of the other cultures in America have leadership. And when you look at us, our leadership was diluted. So at the point that our leadership was diluted, then it's like, well, they're just this, that, the other. No, we're not predispositioned to be anything negative, any different than any other type of people. But if you take away the infrastructure that builds culture, then you're gonna end up with what you have now, which is a lot of people who are lost. So yes, that's it. The culture is the most important thing. It's huge.
Right, and it was interesting what you just said, Dr. Emma, being from another country, from England. And so looking in to see the racial tension that is going on in America, which is, I know coming from Australia, it's not the same.
No.
It's a whole
Absolutely.
different thing in America. And what is your view when you see what's going on in America? What are your thoughts?
I think what we get given as information is doctored.
Right.
Because when I obviously watching the news when I've been here, it's completely different to what we get in England.
Wow.
So when I said about misinformation, you know, the things that we see on the internet,
right,
I don't think actually correlate to the actual circumstances. So what we have is a line of information that is perhaps led down one route. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
you know?
definitely.
So we're getting a perspective, but it's a doctored perspective.
Right. Wow.
So,
Wow.
I mean, if you want to look into it a little bit more, then obviously there will be information out there.
Right.
But if you're just happy to be passive, then obviously you're going to be given certain things.
And that's why it works, because normally if it's not affecting you directly, you're going to be passive about it.
Right.
And so, it makes a lot of sense.
And especially people in other countries, their interest does not lie in America. And so they're only taking in the news information that's being funneled to them rather than the whole picture. So that's a very interesting perspective. Dr. Tina, your thoughts, and I know you have a young son, and so this obviously impacts you very closely. What are your thoughts?
Definitely, just to reiterate some of the things that was said, that's how the media design it.
Yeah.
So the information is not really given out there how it should be in its purest form. And this is not new, because on our last show, we were talking about hip-hop, we were talking about Straight Outta Compton, we were talking about all those different movies and songs that speak about what's going on. The difference is we actually have devices that can actually capture it. Right. So it allows you to see what is actually going on. Right. So it's not that we're seeing what the media is seeing, like, wow, it's not that bad. No, it is that bad. We're able to actually capture it and show it. So that is the difference.
Absolutely.
Because this has been going on for a very long time.
Right.
It's not new.
Yeah, it's not getting worse. People say, well, it's getting worse. It's like, no, it's not getting worse. Everybody has a camera now.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
So you can't get away from it. You know, it's actually probably getting better because everybody has a camera now, you know. So, you know, you think about all of the stories that you hear. Right. You know, I think about personal things that I went through. There was no camera, you know, and fortunately I was never, you know, shot or treated violently, but just the things that they're doing that you know that they don't have a right to do. The things that they say, you know, telling you they're doing something just because they can, you know, and detaining me and, you know, pulling me over a million times in one summer. Like, you know, it's the type of stuff that we see as Black people all the time. Right. And if you're not around, if you're not a white person that's immersed yourself in the city, or you have a lot of black friends, I hate when white people say that, got black friends. But if you don't have if you don't have that, then you don't really have a perspective of how those things go. And so when you see it, it's like, nah, it can't be that bad. Yeah. But then when you see it again and again and again, like I said, it differentiates your mindset, because it's like, I deal with certain white people who are like, oh, that's bad, and they're open to seeing what it is. And I deal with others, it's like, no matter how much you show them, it's like, it's not that bad.
Exactly.
It's not that bad. It can't be that bad.
Because they don't want to believe that.
And you know
they call
what?
it white guilt.
And you know what else? You saw the post that I put up on the tail of what happened in Louisiana and what happened in Minnesota. And I put up a post and I challenged all my white friends to speak on it. And I got applauded by a lot of my Black friends. I was applauded for that. And I didn't hear from a white friend for about an hour. And what I found, and it opened my eyes, was that a lot of people, because they don't feel it or they don't understand it, they can't acknowledge it because they don't understand that it's real. Right. And then I did have some people who did acknowledge it to me, but they were reticent about posting because they felt it was a sensitive issue. Now, me, I'm not sensitive at all. I'm just like, put it out there. So I'm not afraid of putting it out there, but a lot of people, they're not so forward as I am. They won't put things out, but they know it's going on.
I get a lot of white people in my inbox.
Right. And so me, I'll just put things out there because they don't, and that they say it's a sensitive issue. I do understand where they're coming from. They don't want to upset people. Me, I don't care. I'm trying to say it like it is. I'm trying to inform, educate. I'm trying to let people know. But what's going on is that the old bigots, they need to hear from people who are like me. They will not pay attention unless it's someone who looks like them. And then they're angry at me. I got a couple of abusive messages like, well, I suppose you didn't get upset over the other things. No, I was upset over everything, but where I stand is that I see that there's an advantage that people who are born with privilege, and that's with money, with education, with the money to educate, that's a huge advantage. And what's going on in America, it's deeper than just the surface things that are going on. It's the factories that used to be here and employed everyone. Now those the factories have gone over to Asia, and now you've got whole suburbs. The whole urban area that used to have jobs now have no jobs. So a lot of these young guys, there's no purpose. And I think finding a purpose for so many is what is needed. That's one of my solutions, finding a purpose. How do we find the purpose for
That's
people?
what you're saying about culture.
Yeah, I was going to take the words right out of my mouth. It goes back to culture, because when there's culture, there is purpose, right?
Right.
When there's culture, when there's a village, when there are elders, when there are teachers, there's a standard.
Right.
Where there's a standard, there's purpose.
And that's why there needs to be things that equal even the playing field, because the playing field is not even.
But it begins systemically.
Yes.
And so they have to change the targeting. We're targeted.
Absolutely.
You know, it's all by design. You know, it's definitely all by design. And the way that we change the design is that we have to infiltrate the power structure. I was looking not only vote, not only vote.
Yeah.
I think voting is more important actually on the lower level than it is on the upper level. I remember voting for Kerry and Kerry winning the popular vote and not getting into the White House.
Yeah, but then the legislation, voting in the
that's my point. So
Senate
the more
House.
important votes are the lower votes for to vote for your representatives.
That's right.
So for me, it's really the education. And I'm not talking about formal education.
Right.
I'm not talking about your universities and all that. I'm talking about the cultural education.
Absolutely.
Right? When you get a cultural education, you start to have expectations. You start to be able to hold each other accountable.
Right.
And then you start to make the decisions that make change. You start to have, the African Americans or the black people or whatever we're politically called these days.
Right.
We're the ones that don't have anything in our communities. Right? It's the Asians own this, and the Puerto Ricans own this, and everybody and Puerto Ricans, I guess they're kind of one with us too, but they have their culture.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
They do have a big culture.
And so we don't really have that, and so we suffer because of that. And if we have culture, then we'll start to have banks, and we'll start to have stores and doctors and lawyers. And I was looking at the LGBTQIA thing, right? And how they shut down the All-Star game in Charlotte.
Wow.
Right? They shut down the NBA's moving the All-Star game from Charlotte because they stood, right? The NBA, WNBA probably has, I don't know the numbers, but probably has 5 to 7%, people in that demographic.
Right.
It's probably like 80% black. But they fined the women from the WNBA for wearing all black to support you know, the Black Lives Matter movement. And excuse me, if the powerful players all stood up and said, we're not gonna play for a week.
Right.
We don't have to talk about boycotting like a whole season, but if like LeBron and all those guys were like, yo, for the next week until you guys, you know, but we don't understand that type of power because we're not taught that.
Right.
You know.
Right. That's interesting. That's an interesting.
So.
Wow.
It makes a difference.
Yeah. So what I want to do is I want to round this off. It's such an interesting discussion and so important to continue to have this conversation again and again, because you can't, you know, some people need to be hit over the head with it. So final thoughts. I'm going to go to you first, Dr. Tina. Final thoughts on Black Lives Matter.
Well, I mean, definitely we hit on a whole lot of points, but talking about our education, the resources that are given to our communities definitely impact us.
Right.
But also, too, I watched this movie, and I'm not trying to talk long about it. It was called The Purge. And it made me, like, it's funny because the week before I watched Roots,
right,
then I watched The Purge, and then I've just been engulfed into the news, and I'm like, what makes this any different than what's going on now? Whereas when it was like a night that they actually go on this spree to eliminate, I guess, whoever they choose to eliminate. But when I look at the news now, I feel like the purge is going on where it's us being the targets as Black Lives Matter. We're being the targets, and we're the ones that are being eliminated, and it's okay. I look at when Villanova won the championship. And they was tearing up everything, but it was okay because they're happy.
Right.
They weren't thugs. But when we come together to fight for our lives and people are dying and being destroyed, it's like a whole different thing. All the adjectives, all the words, all the labels of what we're doing is totally different. It's not a peaceful thing like it is when you see college kids and even adults tearing up Villanova. But when we're fighting because we're being treated wrong, it's categorized wrong. And it amazes me how the media gets away with that and how many people are really believing what they see because they're not really seeing the real deal that's going on.
Definitely. Dr. Emma, your final thoughts on Black Lives Matter?
Well, I don't, obviously not living in America, it's a little bit difficult for me to make a comment, but in England, when we voted out of the EU, what's happened there is not on the same level, but we've had violence against minorities that surprised myself. You know, we had people actually being killed because they were from somewhere which was deemed to be foreign. And I think this is the first time that in our history we've had anything that kind of reflects what you've been suffering for all these years. So we've had a lot of violence. We've had people wanting rid of people, and I think a lot of the problem is certainly in England is that misinformation. They voted out for the wrong reasons. They didn't know what was happening, and I think that's the key. I do think whichever country we're in, whatever's happening, it's definitely about education. Right.
And Range, your final thoughts on Black Lives Matter?
I mean, I think it's the statement is self-evident, you know. And,
Black lives do matter,
and it's really about understanding that that's not a separatist statement, you know. And I don't say all lives matter, because all lives matter is a diluting statement, right? Exactly. But we know that all lives matter. It's just that we're talking about the ones that are dealing with the disparity and dealing with the systemic,
disenfranchisement.
Exactly.
Disenfranchisement.
The systemic oppression. Yeah. So, you know, Black lives do matter, and you know, I guess I would say that for the majority, you know, Black lives matter, and for all the minority, you know, I would say the culture matters, you know, and learning about yourself and learning and not being afraid of each other the way we've been taught to be afraid of each other. You know, we're portrayed to be thugs and scoundrels. And that's not who we are. Right. And so we don't have to live up to those stereotypes.
And my final thoughts are that we need to continue to have these conversations in public. We need to continue to do it again and again and again, because things do not start off on an equal level. And yes, you got fighters like you guys. Tina's a doctor, you know, but you've had to fight for this, and you've had to fight harder than other people who might have got it in a privileged position. You've fought and clawed your way up there, and more props to you. And a lot of people don't recognize that, and they have to realize that just because you can do it doesn't mean that there was an even playing field to start with. So the more we talk about it, and the more people like me talk about it too, the more it's going to become, this is absolutely real.
Right. And we want her to be the rule and not the exception.
Yes, definitely. So, thank you, Range Da Messenga. We are the Diva Docs, and
Peace.
Check you later.
That's what we